Welcome to the first lecture of International Business course. International business is not a new phenomenon. It is almost synonymous with globalization. The volume of international trade and the number of players in it have increased dramatically over the last few decades. Today, every nation and an increasing number of companies buy and sell goods in the international marketplace. A number of developments around the world have helped to fuel this activity. Take the case of GM, General Motors. In the US, the car maker has applied for bankruptcy, but its operations in the emerging markets are virtually unscathed, in fact growing. Sales increased by 10% in Brazil in 2008, 9% in India, and 6% in China. In the emerging markets, GM has often acted like an entirely different company from the one that has been almost collapsing in Detroit. Of particular significance are the BRIC countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Now we have South Africa, who has joined recently as part of the BRICS. The growth rates of these BRIC countries have been much greater than developed nations. During the boom periods, these countries were growing at 7 to 9%, while the developed markets were growing at 3%. Therefore, international business cannot be neglected and is ultimately important for each and every one of us. The agenda for our discussion and for this particular segment would be to discuss on the drivers of international business, on the globalization index, KOF index of globalization, and we will also discuss some other indices. According to Boston Consulting Group, there are few drivers of international development. In 2005, they have identified 5 currents of globalization, and these are growth of rapidly developing economies, continuing costs and capital advantages of RDEs, development of talent and capabilities in RDEs, migration of customers to RDEs, and emergence of RDE-based global competitors. Now, what is an RDE? The RDEs identified are China, India, Brazil, Mexico, Southeast Asia, and Central and Eastern Europe. The absolute growth in economic activity in the key RDEs over the next several years is expected to come close to that of the 3 leading developed regions. While US, Europe, Western Europe, and Japan are expected to grow by 3 trillion, the key RDEs will grow by more than 2 trillion. Many MNCs are strategizing to generate a large portion of their global sales from RDEs. In addition to some of these currents, we also have certain regional trading agreements which are administered or overseen by the blocs such as WTO, European Union, NAFTA, Mercosur, and FTA. Changing demographics and access to technology has rapidly changed the face of globalization. Let us look at something called the Globalization Index. According to the KOF Index of Globalization, which is one of the most comprehensive indices that are available for Globalization Index, on the first column you would see the Globalization Index for all the countries, followed by 3 other tables, as we could say, which are labeled for economic globalization, social globalization, and political globalization. We can see that Belgium, Ireland, Netherlands, Australia, and Singapore are ranked in the top 5. And we have France at 18th, we have Norway at 20th. Now, what does this globalization index possibly mean? This index, in fact, covers the economic, social, and political dimensions of globalization. It defines globalization to be the process of creating networks of connections among actors at multi-continental distances, mediated through a variety of flows, including people, information and ideas, capital and goods. Therefore, according to the KOF index, globalization is conceptualized as a process that erodes national boundaries, integrates national economies, cultures, technologies, and governance, and produces complex relations of mutual interdependence. The specifically 3 dimensions that have been used are economic globalization, which is characterized has long distance flows of goods, capital, and services, as well as information and perceptions that accompany market changes. The second is the social globalization, which is expressed as the spread of ideas, information, images, and people. The third, the political globalization, is characterized by a diffusion of government policies. The 2012 index, the QOF index, introduced an updated version of the original index, employing more recent data than has been available previously. Now, broadly speaking, economic globalization has two sub-indices, or what we can call as sub-dimensions: the actual economic flows, and these are usually taken to be measures of globalization. The second is the previous literature that employs proxies for restrictions to trade and capital. Consequently, these two sub-indices are constructed that include individual components suggested as proxies for globalization. What does actual flows mean? This sub-index includes data on trade, FDI, portfolio investment. The data on trade are provided by the World Bank, the stocks of FDI, which are normalized by the GDP, and provided by the UNCTAD UNCTAD stat of 2011, or the previous year. The portfolio investment is derived from the IMF's International Financial Statistics. More specifically, trade is the sum of a country's exports and imports, and portfolio investment is the sum of a country's stock of assets and liabilities, which are all normalized by GDP. The data for QOF index are available on a yearly basis for 208 countries over the period from 1970 to 2009. While these variables are straightforward in actual flows, in first the sub-index, income payments to foreign nationals and capital are included to proxy for the extent that a country employs foreign people and capital in its production processes. How about economic restrictions? This second index, it refers to restrictions on trade and capital using hidden import barriers, mean tariff rates, taxes on international trade, and an index of capital controls. Given a certain level of trade, a country with higher revenues from tariffs is less globalized. This index is based on the IMF's annual report on exchange arrangements and exchange restrictions, and includes 13 different types of capital controls. The index is constructed by subtracting the number of restrictions from 13 and multiplying the result by 10. The indices on mean tariff rates and hidden import barriers are also derived from Gwatney et al. Mean tariff rates originate from various sources. It is allocated a rating of 10 to countries that do not impose any tariffs. As the mean tariff rate increases, countries are assigned lower ratings. The rating will decline towards 0 as the mean tariff rate approaches 50%, which is not usually exceeded by most countries. The original source for hidden import barriers is the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report. However, there are certain issues to it. Now, but let us look at the social globalization. The social globalization classifies itself into three categories. The first covers personal contacts. The personal contact is meant to capture direct interaction among people living in different countries. It includes international telecom traffic, which is traffic in minutes per person, and the degree of tourism, incoming and outgoing, a country's population is exposed to, the government and workers' transfers received and paid, and these measure whether and to what extent countries interact, while the stock of foreign population is included to capture existing interactions with people from other countries. The number of international letters sent and received also measure direct interaction among people. Telecom traffic is provided by the ITU, International Telecommunication Union, while the number of letters is taken from the Universal Postal Union's Postal Statistics database. The remaining three variables are from the World Bank. Now let us look at information flows. While personal contact data are meant to capture measurable interactions among people, Information flows is meant to measure the potential flow of ideas and images. It includes the number of internet users for every 100 people, the share of households with a television set, and international newspapers traded, all in percent of GDP. The variables in this sub-index derive from the World Bank, ITU, the UNESCO, and the United Nations Commodity Trade Statistics Database. How about data on cultural proximity? This is arguably the most difficult dimension to grasp. It is suggested by the KOF index methodology that the number of English songs, for example, in national hit lists, or movies shown in national cinemas that originated in Hollywood could be part of cultural proximity. However, these data lack for the majority of countries. Instead, they use imported and exported books. Traded books proxy the extent to which beliefs and values move across national borders, taken from the UNESCO and the United Nations Commodity Trade Statistics Database. Moreover, cultural globalization mostly refers to the domination of US cultural products. Arguably, United States is a trendsetter in much of the global socio-cultural realm, according to Rosendorf in 2000. For many people, the global spread of McDonald's became synonym for globalization itself. In a similar vein, they use the number of IKEAs per country also. Now, looking at the political globalization, they employ the number of embassies and high commissions in a country, and the number of international organizations to which the country is a member, and the number of UN peace missions a country participated in. In addition, the number of treaties signed between two or more states since 1945 is included. These data are taken from Europa World Yearbook, the CIA World Factbook, the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations, and the UN Treaties Collection. It defines the globalization as a process of creating networks of connections among actors at multi-continental distances, mediated through a variety of flows, including people, information and ideas, capital and goods. So, within each of these larger dimensions, you have got sub-indices. For economic dimension, you have actual economic flows, economic restrictions. And the social dimension, you have data on information flows, data on personal contact, and data on cultural proximity. One of the other comprehensive indices used is the A.T. Kearney Globalization Index. It comprises of these four dimensions. The economic integration data combines information on trade and FDI inflows and outflows. The personal contact tracks international travel and tourism, international phone calls and cross-border remittances and personal transfers, including worker remittances, compensation to employees, and other person-to-person non-governmental transfers. For the 2007 Globalization Index, 72 countries were ranked in the Globalization Index, and 97% of the world's GDP and 88% of the world's population were part of these 72 countries. But after 2007, A.T. Kearney has focused more on the retail index than the globalization index. Therefore, the data we have is the old data. The current and most useful data would be for the KOF globalization index. If you now look at the dimension of technological connectivity, it counts the number of internet users, internet hosts, and secure servers through which encrypted transcriptions or transactions are carried out. Finally, political engagement includes each country's memberships in a variety of representative international organizations, personal and financial contributions to UN peacekeeping missions, ratification of selected multilateral treaties, and amounts of governmental transfer payments and receipts. For most variables, each year's inward and outward flows are added, and the sum is divided by the country's nominal economic output, which is the GDP. Two of the political engagement indicators remain as absolute numbers, which are these are memberships in international organizations and number of treaties that are ratified. A country's contributions to UN peacekeeping missions are measured as a weighted average of financial contribution divided by the country's GDP. and the country's personal contribution divided by the country's population. Hence, the indicator counts a country's contributions relative to its capacity to contribute, rather than the absolute size of contribution. This overall process produces data for each year that enable comparisons between countries of all sizes. The resulting data for each given variable is then normalized through a process that assigns values to data points for each year, and the highest data point for that year is valued at 1, and all the other data points are valued as fractions of 1. The range of normalized scores for each variable each year is then multiplied by a scale factor. The base year is assigned a value of 100, and the given variable scale factor for each subsequent year is the percentage growth or decline in the GDP, or population weighted score of the highest data point relative to 100. With the scale factor, comparisons between countries in the same year are preserved. Comparisons between changes in individual variables over time are also possible. Country variable scores are then summed with double and triple weightings on trade and FDI respectively, due to those factors' particular importance in the ebb and flow of globalization. Technological and political variables are each collapsed into single indicators with equal weightings for the component variables. The globalization index scores for every country and year are derived by summing all the indicator scores. Some of the sources you could refer. Most importantly, the KOF Globalization Index is available at this website, globalization.kof.ethz.ch, and the other reference article which you can look up is Does Globalization Affect Growth? I hope you enjoyed the first session. If you have any comments, please do write up and I will address to you as early as possible. Thank you.